Dawn broke over Zephyr Prime with the sky filled with burning bioships. Admiral Janet Cooper stood on the bridge of the Liberty, watching as her fleet prepared for the most desperate gamble in human history. They were going to assault the Vorthak. Queen Directly Captain Linda Jackson led the bomber squadrons toward the massive Queen ship that loomed like a dark moon above the planet. Each fighter carried a single nuclear torpedo designed to penetrate deep into the bioorganic hull before detonating. The pilots knew they would not return. Commander Kate Williams coordinated the ground assault with the surviving Zephyrian resistance fighters. The aliens had been hiding in deep caverns for days, but now they emerged with salvaged human weapons ready to strike at the conversion centers. The Vorthak Queen felt the approaching danger through her psychic connection with the swarm. These new enemies were unlike anything she had encountered before. Their minds burned with determination. Even in the face of certain death, it was both fascinating and terrifying. Major Carol Roberts led her Marine battalion in a boarding assault on one of the smaller bioships. The interior was a maze of living corridors that pulsed with alien blood. Her soldiers fought through chambers filled with acidic fog. While biomechanical horrors stalked them, Dr. Maria Santos worked frantically in her mobile laboratory, analyzing samples of Vorthak tissue. The creatures were adapting to human weapons, faster than expected. Within hours, they would be immune to nuclear fire and kinetic projectiles. The human fleet had discovered that the bioships were vulnerable during their feeding cycles. When they opened to consume matter, they exposed soft internal organs that could be damaged by conventional weapons. It was a narrow window of opportunity. Captain Sandra Davis piloted her fighter through a swarm of smaller Vorthak organisms that emerged from the dying bioships like antibodies from a wound. These creatures were purely biological weapons designed to seek and destroy anything that threatened the collective. The Zephyrian underground cities became staging areas for human commandos who prepared to strike at the planetary conversion centers. These facilities were transforming the planet itself into biomass that would become new ships and soldiers. Lieutenant Colonel Nancy Brown discovered that the Vorthak Queen was not just the leader of the fleet, but its central processing unit. Every bioship was connected to her through quantum-entangled neurons. Kill her and the entire swarm would lose coordination. The battle reached its climax as human ships broke through the outer defenses around the Queen ship. Nuclear fire bloomed against her massive hull as fighters dove into her writhing tentacles. The bioship convulsed in pain as atomic energy burned through her living armor. Commander Julie Wilson led the deepest penetration mission in military history. Her team would enter the Queen ship through wounds blasted by nuclear torpedoes and fight their way to her central nervous system. It was a journey into the heart of a living nightmare. The Vorthak defenders inside the Queen ship were unlike the soldiers encountered on other vessels. These were specialized organisms designed to protect the collective consciousness. Their acid breath could melt through combat armor in seconds. Captain Karen Thompson coordinated the evacuation of human survivors as the battle turned. Against them, the fleet was taking massive casualties, and soon there would be no ships left to carry the wounded. The mission had to succeed now or never. Dr. Lisa Johnson made a breakthrough discovery while studying the Queen biopatterns. The massive creature was actually pregnant with thousands of new bioships that would soon be released across the galaxy. This was not just a battle for one world, but for all life itself. The human Marines fighting inside the Queen ship encountered chambers filled with genetic material from dozens of conquered species. The Vorthak were not just destroying civilizations, but cataloging them for some cosmic purpose, beyond understanding. Major Patricia Miller led her squad through corridors that pulsed like arteries while alien antibodies tried to dissolve their protective suits. The deeper they went, the more the ship seemed to realize they were there, and the defenses became more desperate. The Zephyrian resistance emerged from their caves to launch coordinated strikes against the conversion centers. Their energy weapons were finally effective against the biomechanical equipment that was transforming their world into alien matter. Commander Tracy Moore fought her way through a chamber filled with thousands of biomechanical cocoons, each one containing a partially converted being from various species. The sight drove several of her soldiers to madness, but they pressed forward. The Queen ship began to emit psychic screams that could be heard across space. Other bioships rushed to defend her, but the human fleet held them back with a wall of nuclear fire. The entire battle now focused on this single massive organism. Captain Mary Johnson piloted her fighter directly into one of the Queen tentacles, her nuclear payload set for manual detonation. She joined hundreds of other pilots who chose to sacrifice themselves to wound the massive creature deep inside the bioship. Commander Wilson finally reached what appeared to be the central nervous system, a vast chamber filled with pulsing brain tissue that controlled the entire Vorthak collective. The Queen consciousness was fully aware of their presence. Dr. Andrea Clark analyzed the neural patterns and realized the Queen was not evil in any human sense, but simply following her biological programming to consume and reproduce. She was like a cosmic cancer that had gained intelligence. The human assault teams planted their nuclear charges throughout the central nervous system while biomechanical antibodies swarmed around them. Many soldiers were dissolved by acid before they could complete their missions, but enough charges were placed. Lieutenant Colonel Robin Davis gave the order to detonate, knowing it would kill everyone still inside the Queen ship. The nuclear fires spread through the neural tissue as the massive creature screamed across multiple dimensions of space and time. The effect was immediate. Every bioship in the system suddenly stopped moving as their connection to the collective consciousness was severed. They drifted like dead whales in space, their bioluminescent patterns fading to darkness. Captain Sharon White watched from her damaged fighter as the Queen ship began to collapse in on itself. The nuclear fires had destroyed not just her brain, but the quantum entanglement network that held the swarm together. The surviving Zephyrian resistance fighters emerged from their hiding places to see sunlight for the first time in weeks. The biomatter clouds that had covered their world were dissolving as the conversion process stopped. Admiral Cooper received damage reports from across her fleet. Over 70% casualties, but they had achieved the impossible. They had stopped the Vorthak swarm and saved what remained of Zephyrian civilization, but victory came at a terrible price. The human fleet was reduced to a handful of damaged ships, and most of their best soldiers were dead inside the Queen bioship. The galaxy was safe for now, but Earth was defenseless. The Vorthak threat was ended, but new questions emerged. Where had these creatures come from, and what had driven them to this galaxy? Were there more swarms out there among the stars waiting to continue the cycle of consumption? As rescue ships arrived to help the survivors, both human and Zephyrian, the galaxy began to understand that something fundamental had changed. A young species had proven that no enemy was truly invincible if someone was willing to pay the price to stop them. The battle for Zephyr Prime would be remembered as the day humanity proved itself worthy of its place among the stars. But the real test was yet to come, as other ancient threats stirred in the darkness between galaxies. 6 months after the Zephyr Prime incident, Admiral Janet Cooper stood before the Galactic Council presenting evidence that would change everything. The ancient intelligence controlling the Vorthak was not gone, but was spreading its influence to other systems. Captain Sarah Mitchell had spent those months gathering allies among species that had survived similar attacks. The pattern was always the same: a Vorthak invasion followed by the emergence of an ancient intelligence that offered submission or extinction. Commander Lisa Anderson led the new joint fleet that assembled at the edge of known spaceships from 12 different species, united by the knowledge that their freedom was an illusion maintained by entities older than their civilizations. The Zephyrian survivors had become the most vocal advocates for resistance. Their homeworld was gone, but their spirit remained unbroken. They shared their advanced technology freely with any species willing to join the fight. Dr. Rachel Foster made breakthrough discoveries about the ancient intelligences by studying fragments recovered from Zephyr Prime. These entities were not native to this galaxy, but were refugees from somewhere even more distant. Major Patricia Williams trained mixed-species military units in tactics that had proven effective against biomechanical forces. The old rules of galactic warfare were useless against enemies that could adapt to any strategy within hours. The human research teams, led by Dr. Amanda Johnson, developed new weapons based on quantum uncertainty principles. These devices created localized areas where the laws of physics became unstable, disrupting biomechanical systems. Captain Jennifer Davis commanded the first integrated fleet exercise where human Zephyrian and 6 other species worked together. The cultural barriers were enormous, but the shared threat created bonds stronger than traditional diplomacy. The ancient intelligence from Zephyr Prime had not remained idle. It was spreading its influence through biomechanical probes that infiltrated other worlds. These devices were so small they could pass through planetary defense networks. Undetected, Commander Michelle Roberts led deep space reconnaissance missions to track the spread of the ancient influence. Her ships used stealth technology shared by the Zephyrians to avoid detection while gathering intelligence. The Resistance discovered that 3 more worlds had been transformed into neural networks similar to Zephyr Prime. The ancient intelligences were building a communication system that spanned the entire galaxy. Lieutenant Colonel Karen Thompson established training facilities on remote worlds, where Resistance fighters learned to combat biomechanical enemies. The knowledge gained at Zephyr Prime was shared freely among all allied species. Dr. Susan Davis made the most important discovery of the war while analyzing ancient records. The intelligences were not immortal, but were artificial constructs created by a species that had transcended physical existence eons ago. The revelation that the ancient intelligences were themselves refugees changed everything. They had been fleeing from their creators who had judged them obsolete and were attempting to eliminate all traces of their existence. Captain Linda Martinez led diplomatic missions to species that had chosen submission to the ancient order. Many could be convinced to switch sides if they understood that resistance was possible. The Resistance fleet grew to over 1,000 ships as word spread through the galaxy that the ancient order could be challenged. Species that had hidden in fear for millennia began to emerge with weapons and technologies thought lost. Admiral Cooper coordinated the grand strategy that would determine the fate of galactic civilization. The ancient intelligences were powerful, but they were also predictable, following programming that could be exploited. Commander Tracy Johnson led the first successful assault on a transformed world using tactics developed from the Zephyr Prime experience. The planetary intelligence was destroyed, and the world began returning to normal. The victory proved that the ancient intelligences were not invincible. When cut off from their network, they became vulnerable to conventional attack. The key was preventing them from calling for reinforcements. Major Carol Wilson established liberation protocols for freeing worlds under ancient control. The process was dangerous, and not all attempts succeeded, but each victory inspired more species to join the Resistance. Dr. Angela White discovered how to jam the quantum communication networks that connected the ancient intelligences. This technology became the foundation for the Resistance strategy of divide and conquer. The ancient intelligences finally responded to the growing resistance by activating sleeper agents that had been placed throughout the galaxy. These biomechanical infiltrators began sabotaging resistance efforts from within. Captain Rebecca Anderson led counterintelligence operations to root out the sleeper agents. Her teams developed detection methods based on quantum signature analysis that could identify biomechanical imposters. The war reached its turning point when the Resistance successfully liberated 5 transformed worlds in a coordinated assault. The ancient intelligences were forced to abandon their gradual approach and begin open warfare. Commander Patricia Clark commanded the defense of the Resistance headquarters as massive biofleets emerged from hidden bases throughout the galaxy. The ancient intelligences were revealing the true extent of their power. The final battle began when the Resistance fleet engaged the ancient intelligence mothership near the galactic core. This vessel was the size of a small solar system and contained the master control program for the entire network. Admiral Cooper led the assault personally, knowing that failure would mean the extinction of free will in the galaxy. The ship carried representatives from every species in the Resistance, united in their determination to break the ancient chains. Dr. Helen Brown worked frantically to decode the quantum encryption protecting the mothership control systems. Her breakthrough came just as the ship defenses began adapting to Resistance weapons. The boarding assault was led by mixed species teams that had trained together for months. Human Marines fought alongside Zephyrian commandos and warriors from a dozen other worlds. Major Julie Rodriguez penetrated the deepest levels of the mothership, where the master intelligence resided in a chamber that existed partially outside normal space-time. The entity was larger and older than anything they had encountered. The final confrontation was not a battle but a negotiation. The master intelligence revealed that it too was a refugee seeking only to preserve some remnant of galactic civilization from the ultimate threat. Approaching from outside, Commander Lisa Thompson learned the truth that changed everything. The galaxy itself was dying, consumed by dark matter entities that devoured entire star systems. The ancient intelligences had been trying to preserve select species. The revelation led to an alliance neither side had expected: resistance and ancient intelligences working together to prepare for the real threat approaching from the void between galaxies. Captain Sandra Martinez commanded the new combined fleet that began fortifying the galactic rim against the approaching darkness. The old enemies became partners in a desperate fight for survival. The story that began with the fall of Zephyr Prime ended with the entire galaxy united against a common threat. The ancient order was dismantled, but its knowledge was preserved to fight the darkness. Dr. Maria Wilson established research centers where all species could study the approaching threat together. The barriers between worlds dissolved as everyone focused on the ultimate challenge to existence itself. Admiral Cooper stood on the bridge of the new flagship Unity, watching as the combined fleets of the galaxy prepared for their greatest test. The journey from Zephyr Prime had taught them that no enemy was invincible if free beings stood together. The darkness between galaxies stirred as it detected the organized resistance forming against it. For the first time in cosmic history, a galaxy had unified before the threat arrived. The final message transmitted throughout the galaxy was simple but profound. Freedom was worth fighting for no matter the odds, and hope could survive even in the face of cosmic extinction. The survivors of Zephyr Prime had started something that would echo through eternity. The idea that beings could choose their own destiny rather than submit to ancient authority. As the dark matter entities approached from the void, they would face not a collection of scattered civilizations, but a unified galaxy that had learned the most important lesson of all. Sometimes when hope seems lost, ordinary beings can change the course of cosmic history through courage, determination, and the willingness to sacrifice everything for freedom. The war for the galaxy had ended, but the battle for existence itself was about to begin. 3 days after the Queen bioship collapsed, the real horror began. Admiral Janet Cooper watched from the bridge of her damaged flagship as something emerged from the wreckage of the Vorthak mothership. It was not dead, but transforming into something even more terrible. Captain Laura Mitchell led the reconnaissance mission to investigate the wreckage. Her sensors detected massive energy readings from within the collapsed biomass, as if something was feeding on the nuclear radiation that had killed the Queen. Commander Angela Foster coordinated the evacuation of both human and Zephyrian survivors from the planet's surface. The biomatter that covered much of the world was beginning to move again, forming new patterns and structures that defied understanding. Rebecca Adams made a disturbing discovery while analyzing the collapsed Queen ship. The nuclear detonations had not killed the creature but had triggered some kind of metamorphosis. The Vorthak were entering a new phase of their life cycle. The surviving bioships that had been drifting lifelessly suddenly began to move again, but their behavior was different. They no longer moved as a coordinated swarm, but as independent organisms, each one developing its own hunting patterns. Major Susan Taylor led her Marines in a desperate defense of the evacuation zones as new Vorthak creatures emerged from the planetary biomatter. These were smaller than the original invasion force, but far more aggressive and intelligent. The transformation spreading across Zephyr Prime was unlike anything in the galactic database. The planet itself was becoming a single massive organism, with cities converted into nerve clusters and mountains reshaped into defensive weapons. Captain Diane Roberts fought to maintain orbit as her damaged ship was targeted by biomechanical tendrils that emerged from the planet's surface. The world below was literally reaching into space, trying to drag down anything within range. Commander Jennifer Clark analyzed the energy patterns and realized the terrifying truth. The Vorthak were not just a species but a galactic immune system designed to eliminate civilizations that grew too advanced or too aggressive. The nuclear bombardment that had killed the Queen had also awakened something that had been dormant within the biomass. An ancient intelligence that was far older and more dangerous than the collective consciousness they had just destroyed. Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Johnson, led the final defense of the human research station as waves of new biomechanical creatures attacked. The aliens seemed to be testing human capabilities, learning from each assault and adapting their tactics. Dr. Michelle Brown discovered that the transformed planet was sending signals into deep space, calling to something in the void between galaxies. The Vorthak invasion had not been random, but part of a larger pattern of galactic cleansing. The surviving Zephyrian civilians were evacuated to human ships as their homeworld became increasingly hostile. The crystalline cities that had stood for millennia were being absorbed into a planetary nervous system of unimaginable complexity. Captain Lisa Rodriguez piloted her fighter through swarms of new biomechanical organisms that emerged from atmospheric vents. These creatures were pure killing machines designed by an intelligence that had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations. The ancient intelligence awakening. On Zephyr Prime began to communicate directly with the human survivors. Its thoughts were transmitted through bioelectric fields that caused intense pain in organic brains, but also conveyed meaning. Admiral Cooper realized they were facing something that predated the current galactic civilization by millions of years. The Vorthak were just tools created by this entity to prune species that might threaten the cosmic order commander. Tracy Williams led her engineering teams in a desperate attempt to repair enough ships to carry all the survivors. The ancient intelligence was growing stronger, and soon the entire system would become a trap. The biomechanical creatures emerging from the planet displayed capabilities that violated known physics. They could phase through solid matter, manipulate gravity fields, and regenerate from complete molecular dissolution. Major Carol Davis fought alongside Zephyrian resistance fighters as they held defensive positions around the evacuation zones. The aliens had lost their homeworld, but they refused to abandon the humans who had tried to save them. Dr. Sandra Miller analyzed the quantum signatures of the ancient intelligence and discovered it existed partially outside normal space-time. This explained how it could coordinate attacks across galactic distances and survive the death of stars. The human fleet was reduced to 5 functional ships, carrying over 10,000 survivors, both human and Zephyrian. The ancient intelligence seemed content to let them escape as if their survival served some larger purpose. Captain Amanda Wilson received the final transmission from the planetary surface before the remaining ground teams were overrun. The ancient intelligence was not malevolent, but simply following programming that was older than complex life itself. The escape from Zephyr Prime became a running battle as biomechanical pursuit ships followed the human fleet through hyperspace. These new Vorthak variants could match human technology and seemed to learn from every encounter. Commander Helen White coordinated the defense of the civilian transports as they fled toward the edge of the galaxy. The ancient intelligence was not trying to destroy them, but was studying their capabilities and recording their genetic patterns. The revelation that came through painful psychic contact was almost too terrible to comprehend. The galaxy was artificial, created by an ancient race as a testing ground for emerging civilizations. Most species failed the test and were eliminated. Dr. Karen Johnson worked frantically to decode the psychic transmissions from the ancient intelligence. It was offering humanity a choice: join the cosmic order as junior partners or face elimination. Like countless species before them, the human survivors faced an impossible decision: accept subordination to an intelligence that had orchestrated the deaths of billions, or continue fighting against odds that made victory essentially impossible. Admiral Cooper made the choice that would define humanity's future. They would neither surrender nor submit, but would find a third option that the ancient intelligence had not considered. They would warn other species and build an alliance. The escape fleet reached the edge of the Zephyr system as the planet transformed into something that resembled a massive brain surrounded by orbital defense networks. The ancient intelligence was establishing a permanent presence. Captain Victoria Anderson led the final reconnaissance mission back toward the transformed planet. Her sensors detected construction on a scale that dwarfed anything in recorded history. The entire system was becoming a fortress. The ancient intelligence sent its final message to the fleeing humans. It had been impressed by their determination and sacrifice. They had earned the right to exist, but they must never return to this region of space. Commander Julie Martinez plotted a course toward the galactic core, where other species might be willing to listen to their warning. The battle for Zephyr Prime was over, but the war for galactic freedom had just begun. Dr. Linda Thompson compiled all their data about the Vorthak and the ancient intelligence into a warning that would be broadcast to every known civilization. Some would listen and some would dismiss it as human paranoia. The survivors of the Zephyr Prime battle carried with them the knowledge that they lived in a galaxy where freedom was an illusion and that somewhere in the darkness ancient eyes watched and judged every species that dared to reach for the stars, as their damaged ships limped toward uncertain sanctuary. The humans and Zephyrians who had fought together formed bonds that would reshape galactic politics. They had seen the true face of cosmic authority and chose to resist it. The real battle was just beginning as word spread through the galaxy about what had really happened at Zephyr Prime. Some species would hide in fear while others would join the growing resistance against the ancient order. But for now the survivors could only flee and hope that their sacrifice had not been in vain. The galaxy would never be the same after the day when humanity chose defiance over submission. The distress signal reached Earth Command 12 hours after Zephyr Prime fell. Admiral Janet Cooper stood in the war room watching the holographic display that showed the complete destruction of the Zephyrian homeworld. The images were almost too terrible to process. Captain Christina Lewis decoded the final transmissions from the battle. Every Zephyrian ship had been consumed or destroyed. Their cities lay in ruins beneath clouds of toxic biomatter. The proud species that had shared their knowledge with humanity was now extinct, or worse, converted into Vorthak biomass. General Patricia Adams called an emergency session of the Earth Defense Council. The politicians wanted to close the warp gates and hide behind their defensive barriers. But the military leaders knew that would only delay the inevitable. The Vorthak would find Earth eventually. Dr. Amanda Foster presented her analysis of the enemy forces. The bioships were not just weapons, but a form of galactic cancer that spread from world to world. Each victory made them stronger and more intelligent. They had already consumed 12 civilizations in the past year. Alone, Commander Rachel Turner volunteered to lead the first reconnaissance mission. Her stealth ship could reach Zephyr Prime in 5 days and gather intelligence about the enemy. The mission was essentially suicide, but someone had to learn how these creatures could be stopped. The human fleet that assembled at Luna Station was pitifully small. Compared to the Vorthak Armada, only 40 ships including converted cargo vessels and outdated destroyers against an enemy that had crushed the mighty Zephyrian fleet in 3 days. Captain Michelle Roberts briefed her Marine battalion about the enemy ground forces. The Vorthak soldiers were a fusion of organic tissue and biomechanical components. They could regenerate from wounds, adapt to new weapons, and coordinate through a hive-mind connection. Lieutenant Colonel Julia Martinez prepared her fighter squadron for what everyone knew would be a one-way mission. The Vorthak bioships could absorb energy weapons, and their acid spray could melt through any known armor. Humanity would have to rely on older, more primitive technologies. The journey to Zephyr Prime took 6 days through hyperspace. During that time, the human crews studied every scrap of information about the enemy. They learned that the Vorthak were not native to this galaxy, but invaders from somewhere beyond the galactic. RIM Dr. Susan Phillips worked around the clock developing new weapons that might be effective against bioorganic targets. Nuclear warheads seemed promising since the Vorthak had no experience with atomic fusion, but there was no way to test the theory until they arrived. The Zephyrian survivors hiding in the deep cave sent periodic transmissions describing the ongoing horror above ground. The Vorthak were not just killing the population, but converting them into raw material for new bioships. The very planet itself was being transformed. Captain Angela Davis commanded the human flagship Liberty as it dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Zephyr system. What they saw made even the most hardened veterans gasp in shock. The entire system was crawling with bioships like some galactic infection. The Vorthak Queen sensed the arrival of new prey through her psychic network. These creatures radiated a different kind of energy than the Zephyrians. Their minds burned with an intensity that was both fascinating and painful to touch. She directed her children to investigate. Commander Helen Baker led the first scouting mission into the outer system. Her fighters used passive sensors to avoid detection while mapping the enemy positions. There were over 300 bioships of various sizes feeding on the remains of Zephyrian civilization. The largest Vorthak vessel was the size of a small moon. Its surface writhed with countless tentacles and smaller organisms that seemed to be growing new ships. The Queen herself resided somewhere within that massive structure, coordinating the consumption of the planet Major. Lauren Clark established communication with the surviving Zephyrian resistance fighters hidden in underground bunkers. They reported that the bioships were vulnerable to kinetic weapons, but only for a short time before they adapted to new threats. The human fleet moved carefully through the asteroid belt, using the rocky debris as cover. Admiral Cooper knew they had only one chance to strike. The moment the Vorthak detected them, the entire swarm would converge on their position. Captain Victoria Green studied the tactical display, showing the enemy fleet disposition. The bioships moved in organic patterns, like schools of fish rather than military formations. This suggested they were more intelligent than previously thought, possibly even sentient. Dr. Laura Anderson discovered something disturbing in the captured biomatter samples. The Vorthak tissue contained genetic material from dozens of different species. They were not just consuming civilizations, but cataloging and preserving their biological information for some unknown purpose. The Zephyrian resistance reported that the bioships were beginning to leave orbit. Their consumption of the planet was nearly complete, and they were preparing to move to the next target. The human fleet had arrived just in time to witness the final phase of planetary death. Lieutenant Commander Monica White coordinated with the underground fighters to plan a combined assault. The humans would attack the bioships in space, while the Zephyrians struck at the ground-based conversion centers. It was a desperate plan with little chance of success, and the Vorthak Queen felt the approaching threat and began recalling her scattered children. The new arrivals were clearly different from previous enemies. Their thoughts were chaotic and unpredictable, filled with concepts like sacrifice and honor that made no logical sense. Admiral Cooper gave the order to begin the attack. The human fleet emerged from the asteroid field, firing everything they had. Nuclear missiles streaked toward the bioships, while fighter squadrons dove into the swarm. The real battle for Zephyr Prime had finally begun. The first nuclear detonation caught the Vorthak completely by surprise. The atomic fire burned through bioorganic tissue faster than it could regenerate. For the first time in years, the alien swarm actually retreated from an enemy attack. Captain Elizabeth Mills watched as her torpedo found its target. The massive bioship convulsed as nuclear fire ate through its hull. But even as it died, smaller organisms began emerging from the wreckage like spores from a dying plant. The battle raged for hours as human ships darted between the massive biovessels. Their primitive kinetic weapons carved chunks from alien hulls, while the Vorthak struggled to adapt to this new form of warfare. But there were too many enemies and too few humans. Commander Sandra Hill led the Marine boarding parties that infiltrated damaged bioships. The interior environments were like something from a nightmare. Living walls pulsed with alien heartbeats, while acidic atmosphere burned through protective suits within minutes. The Zephyrian survivors emerged from their hiding places to join the fight. Their energy weapons might be useless against the bioships, but they could still help evacuate civilians and gather intelligence about enemy weaknesses. Dr. Jennifer Moore made a crucial discovery while analyzing the bioship network. The creatures shared a collective consciousness through quantum entanglement. If the Queen could be located and eliminated, the entire fleet might collapse as the first day of battle ended. The human fleet had lost half its ships but had inflicted unprecedented damage on the Vorthak swarm. For the first time since their arrival in this galaxy, the bio-creatures had encountered an enemy they could not simply absorb and convert. Admiral Cooper prepared for the final assault, knowing that this would determine the fate of not just Zephyr Prime, but possibly the entire galaxy. The humans had proven that the Vorthak could be hurt, but could they actually be defeated? The answer would come with the dawn of the second day, when the human fleet would attempt the impossible, a direct assault on the Queen herself. The morning sky over Zephyr Prime turned blood red as the first wave of alien ships descended through the atmosphere. Captain Maya Rodriguez stood on the observation deck of the orbital station watching in horror as the massive biovessels emerged from hyperspace. These were not ships built from metal and circuits, but living creatures the size of cities. Their dark hulls pulsed with veins of sickly green light and writhing tentacles that could crush a building the Vorthak had finally found. Them Admiral Kira 7 of the Zephyrian Defense Fleet tried to maintain order as panic spread through her bridge crew. The blue-skinned aliens had never seen anything like this in their 1,000 years of space travel. Their energy weapons were useless against these organic monstrosities. Down on the planet's surface, Commander Lisa Park led her human research team toward the emergency bunkers. The small human colony on Zephyr Prime was only 3 years old, established to study the advanced Zephyrian technology. But now they found themselves in the middle of a war. The Zephyrian cities were beautiful crystalline structures that sparkled in their twin sun's light. But the Vorthak bioships began spraying a thick black substance that dissolved everything. It touched buildings melted like ice and fire, and the screams of civilians echoed across the valleys. Lieutenant Colonel Amy Stevens watched from her fighter cockpit as the Zephyrian Defense Fleet engaged the invaders. Their plasma cannons fired, brilliant blue beams that should have cut through any known material. Instead, the energy was absorbed by the alien hulls, making them grow larger and stronger. The Vorthak were unlike anything the galaxy had ever encountered. They were not just aliens, but something far worse. They consumed other life forms, converting their biological matter into more ships, more weapons, more soldiers. Every victory against them only made them more powerful. Captain Diana Foster tried to coordinate the evacuation of human civilians from the research station. The Zephyrians had offered them shelter in their underground cities, but she knew it was only delaying the inevitable. These creatures would not stop until every living thing on the planet was dead or converted. The alien bioships moved through space like predatory fish. Their surfaces rippled with muscular contractions, and bony spines emerged from their hulls to fire streams of acid. The very sight of them filled observers with a primal terror that bypassed rational thought. Dr. Michelle Taylor worked frantically in her laboratory trying to understand the enemy biology. Her scanners showed that the Vorthak ships were not just alive but intelligent. Each vessel was a single massive organism, with its own brain and nervous system, and they were all connected to something larger. The Zephyrian ground forces took defensive positions around their cities. Their energy barriers flickered to life, creating domes of protective force. But the Vorthak landed anyway. Their soldiers were nightmare creatures, part insect, part machine, with razor claws and acid breath. Major Katie Williams led a squad of human marines to reinforce the Zephyrian positions. Humans were still new to galactic warfare, but they brought something unique to the battle. They brought weapons that did not rely on energy, bullets and explosives that the Vorthak could not easily adapt to. The first day of battle was a massacre. The Zephyrian orbital platforms fell one by one, consumed by the living ships. Their crews were absorbed into the biomass, becoming part of the enemy. The beautiful crystal cities began to crack under the assault of acidic bombardment. Admiral Kira 7 sent desperate messages across the galaxy calling for help. The Galactic Council had declared the Zephyrians a protected species, but their fleets were light years away. Even if they responded immediately, it would be weeks before reinforcements arrived. Commander Nicole Roberts watched helplessly as another Zephyrian transport was caught by Vorthak tentacles. The ship was slowly crushed while its passengers screamed over the radio. There was nothing her small human fleet could do against creatures this large and powerful. The Vorthak Queen floated in the biofluid of her command chamber. Her massive brain pulsed with satisfaction as she felt her children feeding on this new world. The Zephyrians had such delicious technology, and the strange pale creatures would provide interesting genetic material. Captain Rebecca Johnson tried to maintain communication with Earth Command, but the Vorthak were jamming all long-range transmissions. Their bioships emitted a psychic static that interfered with both technology and organic minds. Anyone who looked at them too long began to hear whispers in alien languages. The human research station fell on the second day. Its defensive weapons were primitive compared to Zephyrian technology, but they lasted longer than expected. The Vorthak had trouble adapting to projectile weapons and chemical explosives. It was a small victory in an ocean of defeat. Dr. Sarah Mitchell made a disturbing discovery while analyzing captured Vorthak tissue samples. The creatures were not from this galaxy. They were refugees from somewhere else fleeing something that had driven them from their original home. What could be so terrible that these nightmares were running from it? The Zephyrian resistance moved into the deep caves beneath their cities. Their energy weapons were useless, but they had mining equipment that could still damage the bio-creatures. The humans joined them, bringing supplies and expertise in guerrilla warfare. As the third day dawned, the sky was completely dark. Vorthak bioships blocked out the suns, their massive forms casting shadows across the dying world. The beautiful civilization that had welcomed humans as friends was being consumed, piece by piece. Admiral Kira 7 made her final transmission to the galaxy before her. Flagship was overrun. She warned other species about the Vorthak and begged them not to let her people's death be meaningless. Then the screaming began as tentacles burst through her bridge commander. Lisa Park led the last group of human survivors toward the mountains. The Zephyrian underground cities were falling, and soon there would be nowhere left to hide. She activated the emergency beacon, knowing it would take months for any rescue ship to arrive. But sometimes, in the darkest moments, hope can come from unexpected places. Deep in space beyond the outer planets, a small fleet was already moving toward Zephyr Prime. The humans of Earth had heard the distress calls, and they were coming. The Vorthak had consumed 12 worlds, and nothing had ever stopped them, but they had never encountered humanity before. They had never faced a species that would cross the galaxy to help strangers or die fighting for principles they believed in. The invasion was entering its final phase, but the real war was about to begin.